Okay,
Okay,
you're
we're
live.
here at CIT 261, week 6. Marco Morley's presenting, Bryce Andrews is presenting, and do you guys know who else is
I think
presenting?
it's Davey.
Davey.
So make sure
Okay.
you can see my screen. Can you see my screen? No.
I cannot see your screen right now. I can see you.
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't make any slides really per se because I just felt like there was so much information that it was better shown with what was out there. But I'm teaching on designing, defining, and triggering CSS3 transforms without custom libraries. Um, one of the coolest things is this transform in combination with animations and transitions. There you can do so many cool things. But transform property basically allows you to visually manipulate an element using the rotate, scale, position, and so many more HTML elements. So in this example, this first one on this page that I have, they create a base element. One thing I will say is you can, with CSS or the transitions, you can create a full HTML page with a CSS document, or you can actually embed it into this HTML, and it still works. It's not as fluid, but it's still manageable that way. And I'll show you kind of how I did that with some examples later on. So this element, it's saying that it's 20 pixels wide, 20 pixels tall. But when you use the scale function, it now becomes 400 by 400, and then text and padding and margins are also affected by the scaling element. Okay, and you give it two parameters, I guess, or values. You can either scale it to stretch horizontally or vertically, and that's usually in a 2D element that you put together. This example shows that you can separate it out in your CSS, or you can have it all on one page. It kind of depends on your styling of CSS, right? But there's so many other options that you can do. So here in this bottom part, it's talking about the value. So scale, affects the size of the element, which we talked about, and it applies to font size, padding, height, width of an element. It's basically the X and Y axis of a two plane. There is also a Y axis we'll talk about in 3D portions. Skew is another command. It tilts the element from left to right or top to bottom. You can use it in several different ways. And this is talking about a shorthand. So I'm not really familiar with the shorthand portion. I didn't study up on that part. So translate moves the element from sideways, back and forth, up and down. Rotate does obviously rotate counterclockwise or clockwise. Matrix combines several forms into one aspect. And the perspective, I also didn't follow up on that one much because it didn't get used a lot in a lot of the examples. But it transforms the descendants, allowing them all to be in the same plane or depth, I guess, in this instance. So this is a skew. This is how you'd write it. You have to use the keyword transform followed by a colon, and then you use either one of the commands, either rotate, translate, skew. There's a whole bunch of them that you can use. And so as I go down, this CodePen, I want to point out, is an awesome resource to go get some ideas. There is a monthly fee, but there's a lot of code that's free. You can just look at it. Obviously, you can inspect the page and you can figure out how to make it works. But this skew that we're showing in the blue is skew X, so it's how it's rocking from left to right. That's just done with a simple X and Y value. Okay. So the same thing down below in the gray, it's now a vertical skew. So it changes it. And as simple as it is, it's actually really awesome that such a simple thing can do a huge thing in my mind. Okay, so again, transform, rotate, and then you determine by degrees. You can either use degrees, or I believe you can use a percent as well. So these 3 blocks as they rotate, and I got some code because I wrote some of my own trying to make some different things work. But the presentation is still the same. So you still use CSS with padding and stuff, and it changes, size or how much margin you have in between. But there's so many different ways that you can manipulate that. So again, from the 3 boxes all doing the same thing, it's using actually one call to do all 3. You're just making 3 different divs and using one element call. In this next one, it's rotating on the Z, which is what we talked about, and it's showing the different functions of the Z depending on which command you use to make that to box do what you want to do, either left to right, up, down, sideways, or rotating. And I can show you some of that too. So translate. So translate basically makes it move from like from its original position to a new position. So like you'd use that like in text or in the screen box, how it's bouncing up and down. That's basically a translate. So that's how you get movement. And again, you can, in one CSS, I guess, element call, you can do multiple transforms within one. You don't have to individualizing and call them out separately, right? So there's lots of changes to those as well.
Hey, Marco, I got a question real quick.
Sure.
You might have gone over this already, but I was curious, what determines like how fast it, for example, on the rotate, like how do you determine when it starts and how fast it spins?
There's let me pull up my notepad here. So there's lots of different things, but it's basically determined by an animation call as well, or a transform, and them working together makes that how it moves, if it's how fast, and you call that out by seconds. So for example, this roll here, which is an infinite call, is what's making, it tells it how fast. So we can change that, and I'll show you kind of what I am doing here. So that way, so I have 3 of them, right? And they're hovering, and you can change that by seconds. You can speed it up or slow it down. I'm trying to remember how I got so many open. I got to make sure I'm doing the right one too. So there I changed it to 8 seconds, and you can see how it slowed down the spinning of the blue boxes. And then, you can change that to almost any iteration for the speed. So then it's separated out. So then how I was saying in rotate, how I have transform rotate, the degrees is what's dictating actually how far it's turning, right? So you figure 360 degrees, but you can adjust that. So it becomes almost a mental play, right? Because when you include the motion, you don't have to go 360 to make it look like it's turning 360 degrees either, right? So there's lots of variations that you can do to change that back and forth, but you use the degree, that value is what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
So there's lots of different things, ideas that you can do to put them to make things move in any aspect. And so I'm not going to cover all these little portions in the bottom of this article. I kind of wanted to skip around and show you some different things that are available. So here's one out of CodePen. It's basically simple droplet. So the one thing that I figured out is you kind of just pick whatever picture you want, and then you have to make it adjust with the size of the framework. But once you figure that out, you can make it activate with hover. So as you can see with this one, the initial hover over the top makes it spin one way, but then pulling away from it causes it to spin the opposite direction. Okay, kind of neat in some of that. So this one, the guy is using, and this website right here is amazing. He's got so many examples of how to use, again, transform animations and translations or transitions that I guess I'm out of the loop. I didn't realize that that's what they were most of the time. So that's one for a menu, and they're still active too, right? So you can click on any one of those as it's scaling to a bigger size. Let's see, where's that one? So here's another example. So a hover moving it left to right, which would be the X, right? Then you have the tilt, okay, which is a combination of X and Y. You have translate, which is moving it from the original position to its new position, and then scaling. Okay, very simple, and it doesn't take much code at all to make those work. And this is his code he demonstrates. So here's an opposite effect. So you hover over it, it expands, hover over it, and it shrinks, right? Again, just some simple tools that can be done. And of course, this one's my kid's favorite. I think that's amazing. And this one's a specific combination of animations with transform as well. Okay. So here's another website. I mean, you can pick, it shows the examples of what can be done of different things. And you probably recognize that from CSS, how they get used, how people show, now probably making sense how it's coming together, because now you've seen it, right? So I'm kind of bouncing around. I apologize, but I thought some of these were really cool to see. So this guy basically explains how to use them in a lot of different ways. And like I said, you can use all these transforms together in one call, making one object do all those things with one in your CSS, right? And it's never ending. Now I understand why Brother James was saying, wow me, because really with simplicity, I mean, they're cool. Did anybody click on the examples he sent out in the email this week? So that kid from our class, what's his name, Sentin Yepo or something like that, he made that clock, which I've seen before, but I mean, he had a real cool features in there, but it actually is keeping exact time, pulling from, I believe it's doing a API call from like an atomic clock kind of thing from your computer as well, so that keeps track. Here's a cool feature. So this one is transparency. So you can turn it on or off so you can see through the cube, but as you click on it, you can see the 4 different sides. Again, very simple, very easy to do in code. And so here, this is an example of how you can, how you manipulate that to show that on the X and Y axis, right? So you can just adjust as a feature. So this is part of like sliders too. So when you see the slider come and you adjust it for scaling up and down, that's basically what this is, right? So here's mine again. This is the one I showed you before, and I just did it. So I made the center one spin opposite, and I'm trying to actually make the center one bounce out and be kind of its own little thing. But I've just been playing as I was trying to write this, my teaching example. I decided that's why I decided I didn't want to use PowerPoint, is because there's so many more visual aids like this that you could use, and makes more sense to me anyway. And that one we saw, that's the spinner feature. So this I picked this one because this kind of shows a plane. So you can change that by that degree, either rocking it up or down and flipping it from front to back. So as you're using that, it changes the whole dynamic and the look. as I was demonstrating to my wife, and I actually closed it and I couldn't find it, but we had it so that the top and bottom were actually inverted the opposite, and it really, as it came back around, it messed up your eyes because we were making it spin 360. So it didn't look like it was spinning, but it was graphically and mentally, I just couldn't put together. You couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So anyway, as you build your things, I'd say practice and play with it. There's some really cool things. So anyway, I think that's most of my examples. I assume there's probably going to be some questions. So let's have them. Anybody got any?
I had one, but I forgot.
So
too busy watching all your transformations.
And there's a ton of them. So
yeah, that was great, Marco.
So I know Mike is probably a lot better at coding by far than I am, but some of these examples are super simple. So that's the one thing I guess I didn't show you is, you know, you can build it right in. So this one that was the 3 boxes, it's built, you know, we just built a HTML and I didn't use a CSS page. From what I gather, yes, you can do it just like CSS, but CSS will help you do so much more seamlessly, you know, with a lot more flow than doing it right in your document. And then you can always use JavaScript. I think Bryce has a few examples with some JavaScript with on click. So as they click and hover, it does different things. But anyway, there's those combinations as well. So anyway, that's it. So hopefully it was worth it.
Yeah, it was great.
Oh, sweet. Do you think maybe you could even copy some of the, like 2 or 3 of the resources you found that were the most helpful, and maybe paste those into our chat?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That'd be great.
I'll do that while whoever teaches next. How's that?
I think it's me. Isn't it just you, JV, and I?
I think so.
All right. So I will start sharing my screen as I go into mine. So mine follows really closely with what Marco just talked about with his transforms. So I've got a PowerPoint that I'm just going to run through pretty quick, but then I want to show some of it, and a lot of it's going to look similar to what Marco just went over, because I mean, you use a lot of the same things in the transitions and animations to get those transforms going. So I'll just go through this. So transitions, as you saw there, I did a nice little transition into this transitions page. So the transitions is just this CSS to help change a property value from one value to the next very smoothly. So the transitions times can be modified to move over different durations, and Marco touched on that, and I'll talk a little more about it. And some of the transitions won't work in Internet Explorer 9 and earlier, is what I found in my research. So here, as Marco was talking about the time, so you have to do 2 things to create a transition. You have to have the CSS property to add an effect to. So here, that would be the CSS property. Whoops. How do let me go back. Okay, so here's the CSS property. And you see we have, you know, we set it up. How big do we want, you know, the box to be? What color? And then it uses a little bit of a WebKit transitions. So here they're going to transition, you know, they're going to change the width of it. So the box is going to grow in width, and it's going to go at, you know, 2 seconds. So it's going to take 2 seconds to transition from its normal size, then it's going to grow, and it's going to do that in 2 seconds. So you can change that, as Marco demonstrated, with this little number right here. So you put any number in there you want, and it will change how fast do that, and that's the duration of the effect. So duration, and right here they have WebKit transitions with 2 seconds, transition with 2 seconds, and then some of them they'll even call out duration and then do the time. But this one specifically does not call out the duration. So these just mean, just like in 2px means 2 pixels, 2s means just 2 seconds. Okay, some things you can do with transitions, you can change several property values. So you can do a lot of things at the same time. And you can, change the speed curve. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. And you can delay it as well. So if you put a delay call in there as it loads the page, or as you, do your JavaScript with it to click on it or something, you can delay it or how with our duration, you can delay it 2 seconds. So if you click and you have a 2 second delay, it won't start changing for 2 seconds. And I think a lot of that they use on the, on load. So when the page is loaded, it won't start doing the transition until, the page is loaded, plus the 2 seconds or 3 seconds, so that the person doesn't miss that transition happening. So it gives them time to, okay, the page is loaded, and then it waits a couple seconds, and then it will do the transition. I think that is what it's mainly used for, is on an on-load call. So the speed curve, now I'll show some examples of this after. We'll just talk about it right now. The speed curve just specifies what the transition is going, how it's going to transition. So I'll just go through these one at a time. Ease specifies, starts out slow and then goes a little fast and then slow at the end. And that's the default one. Linear is the same speed from start to finish. Ease in specifies a transition effect with a slow start. So it'll start slow and then it'll speed up a little bit. And then ease out, it'll be a little faster on the front end, and then it'll slow down towards the end of the transition. And then ease in out means it will slow start and then slow end. Kind of like the ease, the default one. And then there's this one on the bottom, cubic Bezier. You can define your own values in the cubic function. The delay effect, I talked about this earlier. It's just like your duration. You can change it by however many seconds you want. So this is a delay of 1 second, which isn't fast, but you can change that if you want it to delay longer. So that's just, they call it transition delay. So it's going to hold off. After the page is loaded, it's going to delay for as long as you tell it to. Pretty simple. Okay, an animation, that's an element gradually change from one style to another. So if I click again, it's going to bring in my animations. So that's basically, an animation. It changed it from the style. And in transitions, you noticed it was the values changed. And then animations is the style is changing. So you can change as many CSS properties as you want, as many times as you want with animations. So here, this one, I made it grow. And then this one, I made it grow. So that's just, something that PowerPoint has, but I thought it was great for animations. Okay, warning. The animation duration property defines how much time an animation should take to complete. If the animation duration property is not specified, no animation will occur because the default value is 0. So you have to make sure that you tell it how long it's going to take. Do you want it to do it fast, over a second or two, or do you want it to take some time, 4 or 5 seconds? And 4 or 5 seconds doesn't seem like a long time, but in animation, it's a really long time. because you're not really doing that much with the animation. So if you the more seconds you add onto it, the longer it's going to take it to complete. But you have to make sure that it is not undefined, because an undefined duration will make no animation. So just remember that. We do use keyframes when you use specify CSS styles inside the keyframes. You kind of need to do this. You say what it's going to start at, and then you say what you want to change it to. So that's just what the keyframes are. So you're going to start at background color red, and you want to change it to color yellow. So that's what you're going to do with the keyframes. And then the binding tells what element the keyframes are going to be applied to. So this is just, we do our keyframe and then we bind it to this element. Okay, and then animation duration, 4 seconds right there. Don't do that. Okay, that's the end of the slideshow. I'm going to come over here and show some examples. And most of them are from W3 schools. I wanted to touch on this real quick because Marco talked about it, but he didn't go into it. The shorthand properties, it's in the animation, and it's basically this right here. These are just the shorthand for animations. You have animation name, for example, the duration, timing function, that's that linear is going to be the same all the way across. Delay, 2 seconds. Iterations, Marco talked about iterations. This one is set to infinite, so it'll just keep doing it over and over again. Then animation direction is alternate, so it'll change the direction on it. So this one will just keep doing this over and over. So if you look, that alternate direction it's bouncing back and it's changing direction once it gets back to its original position. So if you look over here, you can kind of see some of what's going on. Here's those shorthand names. And then it's kind of tells you what these keyframes, it's telling you what it's doing. And then at 25%, 50, 75, 100, back to original position is 100. It's doing these things. And then when it goes back, it does the other thing. There's so many examples in here. This one, oh, is that the same one? Looks like the same one. So this one is just changing the color of it. It's a pretty simple one. Changing it, through red, yellow, blue, green, and then back to red once it completes its iteration. So this one doesn't have an iteration, so it'll just do it once. So you just kind of get a feel for it over here. This WebKit, they're calling the animation name example, duration 4 seconds. And then, so this is just helping it run in Safari right here, with this WebKit. And you'll notice that you'll have to do that on some of them, because not everything you can run on your computer will run on other computers, so you have to use the WebKit. Just like with anything else, you have to specify. So this is those one transitions. So the timing function. So this is I'm gonna hover over these and it'll show you what these will do. So this linear one should be the same throughout the whole duration of the transition. Okay, so that's the same all the way through. And then this one's gonna go ease in, and then it's going to speed up a little bit in the middle, and then it's going to ease out. And the ease in starts slow, and then speeds up. Ease out starts quick, and then slows down. And then the ease in and out is basically the same one as the ease, which is ease is default. So this is a transition. It's just changing the size of this box, and it's doing it, you know, really nice and smooth. So it's not jumping from the original size to the destination size. It just grows gradually until it reaches that final point. And I think that's probably the biggest thing with transitions. It's doing it gradually, so it's not choppy. And this one just was going to grow. And I think that's, oh, this is an animation. So it's moving it across. And you'll notice that the transition is just changing it, but animation is actually moving. It's kind of like transform. But I think transform's a little more involved than the animation. And I do have some that I'm working on. This isn't my site, but this is one I'm gonna borrow some stuff from. I really enjoyed this one. So mouse over is, you know, it's gonna flip it over. And I'll show you the JavaScript on the back end of this here in a second, because that's partly what I'm supposed to talk about is, you know, doing these with JavaScript. So this one's a hover. This is a click. So click, that just changes it back and forth over the x-axis. And then this one flips over the y-axis like Marco was talking about. And on mine I'm working on, which I'm having a hard time because I want to do a playing card. So I'm having a hard time pulling the pictures in through GitHub. I might have to change it just to my website, but I'm going to have it flip over after they find the card with the hover. So I'm going to have them have to find the card on the screen. And then when they hover over it, it's going to appear. And then when they click on it, it's going to flip it. And I might be a little ambitious in doing that, but I think it'll look cool. So this is a site I found for the, you know, the flip stuff, which is really cool. And then this one has a hover. You click on this little block, and then you can change some of the stuff in here. You change it, and you can change display once, save changes. It flips back over and displays that. And this is a diagonal one, and you can see it doesn't quite go all the way full, but he says, yes, I'm a little crooked on there. So it's just almost, that's that. So I will, if any of you want, I will send this URL to you guys and let you look at this, because this one was really good. So here's the, as you can see, he's got it set up. So up here is the style, so the CSS for it. And he also has a main CSS page, which is this right here. I think this is just to lay his foundation, and then he goes more into detail on the different elements in hard-coded into his HTML page. So he's got his style here, and then scroll down a little bit. He's got a lot of WebKit, you know, transformation stuff, so it can function on multiple platforms. And come down here, and he's got his JavaScript down here. And these are how he's, you know, doing this. This is more of like a PHP, but this is how he's doing. He's got his function here, and so that's when the document is ready, then all these are ready to go. So on, you know, his document being ready, then all these will be able to be interacted with. And then you can just look through here, and he's got a click function, toggle function, and he, does his flips and stuff. And what I noticed on here, he's got a lot of divs within divs. So the first time you see it, it's this, the first one, and then put over, and it changes it to the back one, and then it's pretty cool. This one's has a lot more than some of the ones that Marco was showing, which I liked the simpler ones, because it's kind of, I mean, you can just looking through this, what's going where, but it's a little more, time consuming to look through all this code and pick out what you want, to help you with the code you're writing. But that's it. So this is the stuff that's making, it work right here. And then all this is changing how it's looking. So I really liked this one. And there was another site that I liked for transforms and animations. This had a lot of good stuff in it as well. So I'll send this one to you guys too. Photo carousels and just a bunch of fun stuff. And Marco might have sent this one to you too, because we were kind of talking with each other on this because ours are so similar. But that is what I have for my teaching this week. Any questions on transformations and animations? No questions? Davey. Davey, you're here.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right, I'll just turn the time over to you then.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Good job, Bryce.
Thank you.
Yeah, click on my screen and
Yep, you're good. I think I'm on you.
so I'm doing about, I think you guys covered this last week, manipulating CSS class properties with JavaScript. It's pretty simple. From what I could see, I'm sure it could get really in depth. What's a CSS property? I mean, when you look at a CSS style sheet, you have the selector here, and then you have the properties here, text, align, color, and you have their values. And this whole block here is the declaration. So in this example, that means that every paragraph that has a class of sender will be centered and read. That's all it means. So, and here we have, you guys probably know at W3 schools, there's like a whole list of CSS properties that exist that we can interact with, and we can interact with those with JavaScript. An easy way to change a CSS property is to use the style method here. For example, you get the element by ID, like P2 here, that's the ID, and then you just change its color to like blue, or you could put a, an hexadecimal value of your choosing. And you can also do other things, like you can do .query selector all, which and then you look for every every element that has the bar class in the HTML document. Then you store all of that into an array, and then you can loop through that array and just change the property to all of them. Like in this example, you change the opacity to 0. And I'm just going to show you my example. That's not it. Okay. I made a little thing here. Basically, when you change the, I have some sliders that automatically change the font size of this text down here. And then this slider changes the family. Like I'm changing those CSS properties. And here I can change the color. And I'm just using JavaScript to manipulate the properties like that. I like doing this because I like the sliders because I can have it instantly change as opposed to, you know, like click a button or something. I like doing that.
Can you show some of your code for that, Davey?
What's that?
Can you show some of your code for that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So, so for each of those sliders, I have, I'm setting them up and I have IDs and classes. And then I have an area, this, I call it dynamic text. That's the area that changes here. And on the CSS, there's really not much. I mean, the slider, that's just like to have the appearance of the slider so that it's round. That's really all this does. Okay. But the actual JavaScript that changes those size, the family, and the font family, the color, is here. Like for the font family, I just made an array of fonts that I just pre-picked. That on Chrome, they seem to work fine. And then here, so here I get those elements. Let's say for the size, I get the element of that, yes, of the slider. Okay, so the slider, I get the element here. And then here I set the value. Hang on, I just did this last night. So yeah, okay, so here's the JavaScript function that I'm calling. Every time the slider moves, it's like there's an on input that's a method of that element. Every time it moves, it does this function and it just adjusts the font size. You know, it's using the method style dot font size of that dynamic text. Dynamic text is this whole block here. It's that here, okay? And saying this value, the value of the slider size, whatever it is at the moment. And here I had to add plus px because I found out that in Chrome, if you don't put px, nothing was happening. I have to have the px in there. Here, it actually works here in this HTML preview, but in Chrome, it wasn't working. And I'm doing the same for the other ones for the style. It's just going through, it's setting the font family, and it's setting it to like one of the elements in the array. And like, so whatever the slider is, it's gonna say, okay, the slider is at like, I don't know, like 8. So it's gonna do 8 minus 1, because you know the array starts at 0. And I do the same thing for the web color. I just get the value, but for the web color though, you see how it goes from like 0 to like FFFF. That's like 16 million values. So here, if you look at my font color slider, the maximum is that, and I put the middle, and the minimum is 0. And because CSS, I guess, doesn't take those values. I mean, it takes only hexadecimal. I had to convert it to hexadecimal through this function here. And I spent some time in this. It wasn't working right, but now it's working. And it's really simple. It's just a 2-string base 16, and it converts it for you. But the one thing that I had issues with, and I actually had to make sure that, like, the value that was coming in was an integer, and I kept treating it as a string, and it wasn't working. And this just adds zeros in front. Like when it's at 0, before there would only be like 3 zeros or 1 0 or something. So it wasn't actually displaying the right color. So that way it keeps it to, 6 digits. So that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't know how useful that could be, but that's fun.
Yeah, I think it was. Good job, Davey. Thanks.
Thanks.
Cool. Any questions for Davey on that?
No, that was great.
All right. I guess I could stop the broadcast.
Yeah.
Is everybody good with it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll stop that.